Hey everybody, welcome back to ABTG, that place on the internet where we try to figure out whether movies or TV shows are absolute bullshit, true greatness, or something somewhere in between. Today we're talking about WANDAVISION, the limited series from Marvel and Disney. Here we go. Please do keep in mind all my reviews are spoiler free in the sense that I am not going to spoil anything that happens in WANDAVISION specifically, but in order to talk about WANDAVISION, the show itself, we do need to talk about things that have happened in the MCU before that. And so, of course, this is basically, I suppose, a spoiler warning for the 23 previous Marvel movies. Alright, so WandaVision is about mostly Wanda and kinda Vision. It's a show that takes place after Infinity War, after Endgame, and it's basically about Wanda and how she's dealing with the grief of losing Vision. It also deals with the fact that she's had a lot of grief and a lot of loss in her life coming up to that point. She lost her brother, she lost her parents, and it also dives deep into her desire to actually have a family home. So, is this interesting? Was it worth putting out 9 entire episodes? I don't know. For starters, let me be very clear, I am a fan of Vision in the MCU and a fan of Scarlet Witch in the MCU. I think that both of these characters are very interesting. I think they were very well introduced and very well utilized in the movies. In this show, however, I'm not convinced. You know, I'm not convinced with what this show did with them. Yes, the cinematography was great because every episode kind of dived into a different era of TV, and that ties into Wanda's story, or Wanda's backstory, and that was fun. That was nice. It was a fun gimmick, I suppose, that lasted for a while until you realize that there's no true substance in this show. I know. Some people will argue that it really is about the challenges and the internal grief and strife that Wanda and Vision to some certain extent have to go through, but I don't really know how to say this. By the time we got to the end of the show, I feel like the show left me wanting or needing more, but not in a good way. Not in that way that when you're finished your favorite TV show, you feel empty because you miss those characters. This time I felt kind of empty because, well, the show gave me nothing. A lot of the big reveals, a lot of the big twists that punctuated those episodes kind of served no purpose in the end. All they were there for was being that twist at the end of each episode, which is a thing that WandaVision did a lot. Nothing happens for like the entire episode, and then in the final maybe 5 minutes you get a bunch of twists, you get a bunch of reveals, and that's the thing that keeps you hooked, and that's the thing that keeps you coming back to the next episode. Let's just drop the story for a bit though, and talk about, I suppose, everything on a technical level. It is very well directed. There's absolutely no problem with that, and as I was saying earlier, all of the visual styles from every era of television are very well respected, and it's very fun to see all that. The acting is, for the most part, very good. I do think that some performances weren't as good as others, some weren't as solid, and that goes for the VFX as well. The VFX are good for a TV show, but not as good as I would expect Disney and Marvel to have in their officially released Phase 4 TV shows. I was expecting better quality, especially with Wanda's spells being cast. It was all very saturated, and a lot of the flying off or the lifting up off the ground, that didn't look too good either. The music serves its purpose. I can't really comment on that because you don't really notice it, I guess. I suppose the music did change again, depending on the era, depending on the aesthetic, and that was nice. I must insist and say that all of the props, the costumes, the sets were high quality. I enjoyed the costume changes that some of the characters went through, and the characters, not all of them were useful, not all of them were interesting. Most of the characters were brought back from other TV shows or other movies that took place in the MCU, and although that is fun, I feel like this particular show didn't really put in the work of introducing its own characters, except for the villain, which ultimately very much underwhelmed me. I'm gonna say it, I wasn't interested in the villain at all. Not to mention, I feel like Scarlet Witch is one of the most badass, one of the most powerful characters that we have in the MCU at the moment. I mean, she almost took down Thanos by herself. I feel like she should have taken down this enemy, this villain, way easier than what she did. Maybe it's because she was, emotionally compromised, and that's what they were trying to work with, but it wasn't as clear as maybe it could have been. Which brings us back to the story. I just don't know how to put words to this, but the story that they told was, I suppose, interesting, but didn't merit this much attention or this much time. And maybe I'll come back on that and change my opinion or change my mind once Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness comes out. Maybe this is just set up for that movie. Maybe this is set up for the concept of the multiverse being introduced into the MCU, but I don't know, it didn't really work for me. It is a well-produced show, I just feel like it's a bit more style over substance. Even though, as I said, we're kind of dealing with grief and deep emotional issues. Also, the thing is, and I can't really talk about this in detail because, well, this is spoiler free, but there's a lot of questions that come up, and I don't get as many answers as I have questions by the time this show ends. They're not necessarily good questions about like where this show is going to lead, where the MCU is going to go. It's me being puzzled as to how the show explained things, or the show's inability to actually explain things or go into the details of things. And I know that the MCU is not as, anal about the details as, for example, Star Trek. The MCU is just kind of making things up as it goes. I still do have questions. Now, I can't really get into this without spoiling too much, so I won't, but just as a more precise example of what I'm talking about, when I'm talking about questions that don't get answered, WandaVision seems to be kind of clueless as to what's going on in those first episodes, and then after there's a reveal, you kind of realize that maybe she wasn't, and the show never correctly answers the question as to whether she was playing dumb for the audience per se, or if she legitimately didn't know because she was having issues remembering due to the grief and due to the trauma. Those are the kind of things that I would have liked to see better concluded, better wrapped up, better explained by the time we got to the finale, and none of that happens. So, yeah. Bit disappointing. In conclusion, WandaVision was fun enough. The problems are the fact that it takes a lot of time to set up what it wants to set up, and it eventually ends up dragging out a lot of things. And then once we finally come to those concluding episodes, it kind of doesn't tie up a lot of the things that it was setting up. And then of course I just have to mention this, even if this is the slightest spoiler. We get a big fight at the end, and I wasn't very impressed with that. I wasn't very impressed with the fact that the show needed to resort to a big fight, and I wasn't very impressed with how the fight looked, or was choreographed, for that matter. So yeah, WandaVision. Not the best thing to come out of the MCU, by far not the worst, but I would say maybe a disappointing start to Phase 4, and to the Disney Plus Marvel series that will be coming out. I would probably give this an alright, because it's better than above average, but I really don't think I can sit here and say that WandaVision was solid good. So, alright for me. That's it. What did you think of WandaVision? Have you seen it? Do you even care about the MCU at this point? Like, subscribe, and I'll see you next time.